summer, I'm wearing capris a lot. So I embellished this pair that I just finished sewing with a cute button vent at the hems. I wasn't satisfied with how one of my vintage patterns approached this technique, so I made it my own way that's even better. I'll show you how to draft it for any capris or pants pattern and how to sew it. First, just to orient yourself here, this is how this works. Here's my capris, and here's a little sample of the same button hem vent here. So the front leg has an attached facing piece, which you can see here, which is basically just an extension of the leg piece, and it's folded back on the seam line, which is right here, and you can see that here. Think of it like the front facing on a button-down shirt where you sew your buttonholes. Then the back leg has an attached extension, which forms this little underlap here, and that goes right underneath the front facing. So on our little sample, here's our little extension underneath our facing, and that's what you sew your buttons onto. This is really similar to the vent for a pencil skirt for walking ease, or the button sleeve vent of a suit jacket, but will be facing the underlap extension to support the buttons. You can customize the length and width of your vent depending on your buttons, so figure out what buttons you're using and how many. You'll want to make sure that your extension is at least ½ inch wider than the width your buttonholes will need to be so that they'll fit on the extension and the facing. About 1 inch works nicely depending on how big your buttons are, and it's better to err on it being a little wider than you need. And keep in mind that 1 inch that I mentioned is past the width of your seam allowance. So here, this is a 1 inch extension, so the total to the seam line is actually 1 inch plus my 5/8 inch seam allowance. So that's the total depth of your extension and your facing. The height of your vent will also be determined by how many buttons you want to use to close up your capris. You're not going to want that top button right up all the way to the end, nor will you want it to fall within your hem allowance too. So decide how wide you want your vent and how tall you want it, not including your hem. Mine was 1 inch wide and 3¼ inches tall, and I used 3 buttons here. The other measurement you need to have handy is how deep your pants hemline will be. I did a ½ inch hem that's turned in twice, so my hemline was 1 inch. So let's do this. We're going to draft the extension for the button hem vent for both the front and the back leg pieces of whatever cigarette pants or capris pants pattern you want to use. This is the one that I'm going to use. And we're going to start with the front leg. If you're tracing your pattern piece, trace your front leg, but don't cut it out yet. And if you've already cut out your pattern piece, don't worry about it. You can just tape on some extra paper for the extension at the side seam, and you'll draft it out and cut it out from that. So here's the lower part of my front leg traced. I'm just going to use this part for this tutorial. And I'm going to use a pen so that you can see everything better. Here's my side seam and my inseam. On the side seam, draw in the seam line with a dashed line. I have a 5/8 inch seam allowance, so that's where I'm drawing mine. We'll also draw a horizontal dashed line on the hemline of the leg piece, so that's 1 inch for me. That's the actual hemline where the fabric will be folded to form the hem. Now extend the cutting line of the lower edge of your pants pattern below that hem, just a few inches. Doesn't need to be super precise here yet. And just to make it easier for you to see, I'll just carry that over to the bottom of my pants leg. And now we'll extend that dashed hemline, which for me was 1 inch up, the same length. Again, no need to be super precise yet. Now we're going to draw a dashed vertical line, however wide you determined you wanted your vent depth or width to be. And remember I said I went with 1 inch for my capris, so I will do the same here. So this is going to be 1 inch away from what would have been the cutting line of our front leg at the side seam. Now we're going to draw another vertical line, this time solid, a 1/4 inch away from this line, because this 1/4 inch edge will be a narrow hem for this facing piece. So the dashed line will be the line you fold your little 1/4 inch hem in on. Now we need to mark the top. Let's say we want our vent 3¼ inches tall, again like I did for my pink capris. And remember that height is not including the hem depth. First, we'll mark this with a dot at our seam line on our pant leg. And again, remember, that's going to be 3¼ inches for me up from that hemline. I'll mark that with a little dot. This dot is where we'll stop sewing when we sew our side seam. So I'll turn this into a little circle because I'll punch this out later to make it easier to mark. Now we'll angle our facing up towards the leg, which you can see how it looks on the back side. But we need to make sure that that angle starts higher up than this dot where we're going to stop stitching. And the reason for that is it just makes it easier between the buttonholes and this line where you stop stitching and when we finish this on the inside, because you need to be able to actually fold this open so that you can sew your buttonholes. Or if you do your buttonholes first, which you could, you still need to be able to fold this open so that you can finish the top edge. So over on our facing side, at the dashed line, just mark a little line the same height as our dot here. So that's 3¼ inches up from my hemline for me. Just a little dot there. And now we're going to measure 1/2 inch up from here. This is 1/2 inch up, and we're going to just draw a straight line right across that little 1/4 inch seam allowance. And now we're just going to go up another 1/2 inch from there, and this time we're going to mark that dot right on our cutting line of our leg pattern piece. And we're just going to connect that with the dashed line that starts at the top of our 1/4 inch hem for this facing. So that forms our little angle and our little top of our 1/4 inch seam allowance. Then we just want to mark a notch at the bottom edge right at what is the leg seam line. Now we do stop stitching here, but we're going to fold this back right on this seam line. So making a notch here helps us see where to fold this back. And that's it for the front. Cut out your front leg, and after that, your piece will look roughly like this. All we've really added is just this small little bit for our facing. So this is our hemline for our pants leg. This is our side seam and the dot where we will stop stitching. This is our notch, so when we fold this back, we can easily see where that seam line is. And our little 1/4 inch hem allowance for the facing so that it's finished nicely from the inside. On to the back. For the back, we'll start out exactly as we did for the front. So here's the lower part of my back pant leg pattern piece, and this is my side seam. Draw a dashed line to indicate the seam line on the side seam. And again, mine is 5/8 of an inch. And draw a dashed line for the hemline up from the cutting edge of the bottom of the pant leg. So again, that's 1 inch for my hem. We'll also extend the cutting line of the lower edge of your pant leg pattern a few inches. And again, I'll just extend that so you can see that easier. And we'll also extend the dashed hemline. Now, just like we did for the front, we need a dot to indicate the end of our stitching line on our side seam. So however tall you want your vent and you marked on your front at the side seam line, mark a dot on the back here too. For me, that's 3/4 of an inch up from the hemline. Now we'll draw a dashed vertical line, however wide you determined you wanted your vent depth or width to be, away from the cutting edge of the pant leg at the side seam. Again, remember, mine is 1 inch. Unlike the front, now we're going to draw another dashed vertical line exactly as far over as this depth, so again 1 inch for me. I'm going to mark this first line as the fold line since this is where our back leg extension will fold back on itself to form the self-facing. Now we need to angle it at the top again, but this time twice since this is our extension and the facing. So on our extension at our fold line that was just marked, mark a little line at the same height at the dot where we'll stop stitching, so 3¼ inch up from my hem. And then measure a 1/2 inch up from that and make another little mark. Then go up another 1/2 inch from that mark and make a little mark on both the cutting line of the leg and the outer dashed line. and just connect those dots down to the little mark here on our fold line. Now, since the extension will cover the seam allowance of the pant leg, we need to add in the depth of our seam allowance plus a little 1/4 inch hem for it. So draw in another vertical dashed line 5/8 inch or your seam allowance away from the outer dashed line. This is the part when folded back that will overlap with the pant leg seam allowance. And just one more vertical line, this time solid, a 1/4 inch away from that last dashed line. And we just need to finish off these last 2 lines with a straight horizontal line at the top point of our angles. To mark the fold line of the extension at the bottom, draw a notch. That'll just help you know where to fold this. You can mark a notch at the top too, but it's pretty easy since when you fold this back, it'll be the lowest point right here. And we're ready to cut out the back leg. And by the way, you could actually trace the back from the front by flipping it over and tracing the angles and then adding in the seam allowances, but I wanted you to see how you actually get to this final shape and why. So now cut out your back leg piece, and here's our back leg and our front leg. Our front leg has our facing and our narrow hem allowance for our facing, and our back leg has the extension and then the facing for the extension, and then the extra bit to cover the seam allowance and our little narrow 1/4 inch hem. Time to cut out your fabric. I have my cutout samples of the bottom of my front and back legs. I recommend interfacing the facing on your front leg, and this may be hard to see, but I've interfaced this area and that helps support your buttonholes. It should just be to the seam line, but only up as high as your dot and not including the hem allowance. So just this little rectangle right here. That being said, buttonholes are really optional. They're not needed to be functional, so you could just sew the buttons on without making buttonholes if you want. That's actually how button sleeve vents on ready-to-wear jackets usually are. Do everything you need to do for your pants construction except sewing the leg seams. So waistline darts, pockets, whatever. Then we'll construct our vent. First up, we'll narrow hem the free edge of the facing on our front leg and the free edge of the facing for the extension on our back leg with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, which we added to our pattern pieces. So press under a 1/4 inch and then top stitch those hems and give them a press. Next, go ahead and sew and finish your inseams. Now, I'm not going to do that since this is just a little sample and I want you to be able to see all the next steps easily. But after that, on both the back leg and front legs, press up the hem. So I'm pressing on my hemline on the back and front pieces, and if you've just sewed your inseam, that will be all together and not separate like mine. And then I'm folding the seam allowances in and pressing. I'm just doing a simple double fold hem, 1/2 inch up and 1/2 inch in. And after pressing, open this all back up because we're not actually hemming yet. Ignoring the hems for a minute, now we'll pin and sew our side seams. And remember, we're only sewing down to the dot that we marked right on the stitching line. And if it makes this easier, you can also draw in the stitching line under the little extension to make that easier to see as you get close to the dot. And you can see my side seam sewed down to the dot. And if I flip this to the right side, you can start to see this taking shape. On the front, we need to press a crease right at the seam line from the dot to the raw edge at the notch that we marked. So on that notch, up to the dot that we sewed, you're just going to press a little crease, just like we did for the hem. So there's that. And then on the back, we need to press a crease right at the fold line of the extension, again down to the notch that we marked. And this is where the extension turns back on itself to make a facing. So we'll fold this right on the low point of that V to our notch that we marked and give that a little press as well. Okay, so all those creases that we've made are important because now we're going to start working on our hem. On the front leg, with right sides together, we're going to fold back the facing on that crease that we made, which ends in that notch, and we're going to fold this back, and we're going to stitch right on the top hemline from our little narrow hem that we did all the way to the end. So I'm going to mark that so you can see exactly where we're talking about. So this is along my hemline, and I'm just going to stitch right there. And on the back, we're going to do similar. We're going to fold back along the fold line that we marked with a little notch at the bottom, and we're going to fold back precisely on that fold line, and we're going to stitch right across the top of the hemline here. And again, I'll just mark that to make that a little bit easier to see. So right from the narrow hem all the way to that fold line. After you've sewed that short line across the hemline on the back and the front legs, then we can trim away the excess seam allowance and complete our hem. Trim off the hem seam allowances close to where you stopped stitching, and then just cut off and angle that last little bit up. Now we can turn everything back to the right side, and you can use a bone folder or a knitting needle to turn out those points. And then you can fold back up your hem and give it all a good press, and you can see how nicely the extension folds and is finished at the hemline, and same for the facing on the front leg. And let's look at this from the right side, and we can see our little vent here with our facing and our extension and the facing for the extension. And you can hem your pants now or you can hem them later, your choice. And we're almost done here. We're going to sew a narrow 1/4 inch seam line along the angled side of the front facing and the back extension, and across the seam allowances of the pant leg at the top. You can see that on this little sample here. This is not going to go through the outer pants legs though, so fold those out of the way. So just from the seam line, over and then down the angle to the edge of the fabric. And make sure you're catching all of the layers of the facings and extension. And with that sewed now, you can go ahead and finish your seam allowances however you'd like. The seam allowances are currently aimed towards the front of the leg, so if you'd like, you can clip into the seam allowances to press them towards the back, and that's what I did on my pink pair. And here is our finished vent, ready for buttonholes. Because of how we drafted this, there's no problem tucking the pants leg up and out of the way to sew the top buttonhole. You're going to want to make sure that your buttonholes start about 1/2 inch from the edge of the vent, and make sure to place them so that the last one is not within your hem allowance. And hey, if you want to skip buttonholes and just go straight to sewing your buttons on, go for it. Try it for capris for summer or even cigarette pants for fall. In the meantime, check out one of these 2 videos, and I'll see you again soon with more vintage sewing.